It was almost midnight when I heard a knock at my window. My neighbor, pale and shaking, stood outside begging me not to go back into my own house. When I asked why, she didn't answer. She only raised her hand and pointed toward my living room window. Then, in a broken whisper, she said the words that froze me in place, "Because they're already inside, and they've been waiting for you." Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next one. It was close to midnight when I heard the sound. At first, I thought it was just the branches tapping against the window, but then came 3 slow knocks, steady and deliberate. My heart jumped. No one should be outside at that hour. I pulled the curtain back just a little, careful not to let my face show, and there she was, my neighbor, Mrs. Kent, standing in the dim yellow glow of the street lamp. Her gray sweater hung loose on her shoulders, her hands shaking as if she had run across the street in a hurry. Her eyes were wide, and her lips trembled. When I slid the glass open a few inches, her voice cracked. "Laura, don't go back inside your house," she whispered, barely able to catch her breath. I froze where I stood. My name felt heavy in her mouth, like a warning meant for me alone. I was already inside my own home, but the way she said it made me feel like I was trapped on the wrong side of my own walls. I asked her what she meant, my voice unsteady, but she only raised her hand, pointing toward the living room window with a shaking finger. Her whisper came again, softer this time, but sharp enough to cut through me. "Because they're already in the room." My throat tightened, and a cold wave spread through my chest. I turned slowly toward the living room. From where I stood in the hallway, I could only see the corner of the sofa and the faint reflection of the old lamp. But the air felt heavy, and every instinct in me screamed that someone was holding their breath in the dark, waiting for me to step further inside. Laura's hand shook as she tightened her grip on the curtain. She wanted to tell Mrs. Kent that it was impossible, that no one could be inside. But the fear in her neighbor's eyes left no room for doubt. Mrs. Kent was not the kind of woman who panicked easily. She was steady, sharp, and had lived on the street for over 30 years. If she was this terrified, something was truly wrong. Laura forced herself to move slowly down the short hallway that led to the living room. Her slippers pressed against the wooden floor, every creak sounding louder than it should. The house, which always felt warm and safe, suddenly seemed to hold its breath with her. She thought of her father's old clock on the wall, always ticking like a heartbeat, but tonight she couldn't hear it. The silence felt unnatural, like someone had silenced every sound on purpose. When she reached the end of the hallway, she leaned just enough to see around the corner. Her living room lamp glowed dimly, though she remembered turning it off before heading to bed. The sofa was slightly pulled away from the wall, not how she had left it. And then she saw it. The picture frame of her late mother, the one that always sat neatly on the mantel, was lying flat on the carpet. Her breath caught. That frame was heavy. It didn't just fall on its own. Laura's eyes darted to the dark reflection in the glass of the window. For a brief second, she thought she saw movement, a shadow shifting by the curtain. Her chest tightened, and every instinct screamed for her to step back. But her legs wouldn't move. She stood frozen, caught between disbelief and dread, until she heard it. Soft, deliberate breathing that didn't belong to her. Laura's heart pounded so hard it hurt. She pressed her back against the hallway wall, trying to steady her breath. But the sound from the living room grew clearer. It wasn't the soft hum of the fridge or the usual creaks of the old house. This was slower, human, like someone trying to control each inhale. She clenched her fists and reminded herself she was not alone. Mrs. Kent was still outside, watching. Gathering courage, Laura took one cautious step closer. The floor groaned under her weight, and the breathing inside suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was worse, sharper, as if whoever was there was now listening for her. A chill rushed down her spine. She quickly grabbed the first thing within reach, an old umbrella leaning against the wall. It was flimsy protection, but holding it gave her a small sense of control. She forced herself to whisper, "Who's there?" Her voice cracked, thin and shaky, swallowed by the heavy quiet. No answer came, but something shifted. Laura's eyes darted to the far end of the living room where the curtain brushed lightly, though the window was closed. She took another step forward, and then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Muddy footprints on her rug, fresh and uneven, leading away from the window, and stopping just behind the sofa. The sofa was big enough for someone to crouch behind. Laura's grip on the umbrella tightened, and she realized with dread that she was standing just a few feet away from whoever had walked those prints inside her home. Laura's mouth went dry as she stared at the sofa, her eyes fixed on the trail of muddy footprints that ended behind it, her stomach twisting with dread. The lamp on the side table flickered slightly, its dim light casting long, stretched shadows across the carpet. Every instinct screamed for her to run outside to Mrs. Kent, but her feet wouldn't move. She needed to know who or what was inside her home. Summoning every bit of courage, she whispered, "I know you're there." Her own words sounded foreign, as though someone else had spoken them. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, so faint she almost thought she imagined it, came the sound of fabric shifting. Someone was breathing low and heavy, trying to stay hidden. Laura's grip on the umbrella tightened until her knuckles turned white. She inched closer, the floor groaning with every step. The air in the room felt heavier now, carrying a faint smell of damp soil, as if someone had brought the outside in. Just as she reached the corner of the sofa, she stopped. She couldn't bring herself to lean over. Then, something unexpected. A soft click echoed from the back of the room. Laura's eyes snapped toward the old family cabinet. Its door, which had been closed for years, now stood slightly ajar. Inside, in the faint light, she could make out another shadow, longer, thinner, like someone had slipped into the narrow space and was standing perfectly still. Her breath caught in her throat. There wasn't just one person hiding in her house. There were two. Laura staggered back, her heel hitting the baseboard with a hollow thud. Two. The thought made her chest tighten until she could barely breathe. She shot a glance toward the window where Mrs. Kent still stood outside, her face pale and pressed close to the glass. Mrs. Kent mouthed something, but Laura couldn't make it out. The urgency in her neighbor's eyes told her enough. "Don't move closer." Laura's hands trembled around the umbrella, the metal tip rattling softly against the floor. The sound was enough to break the stillness. Behind the sofa, a shape shifted, a low scrape against the carpet. From the cabinet came another faint sound, something like a shoe brushing against wood. Whoever they were waiting, silent, patient, like predators deciding when to strike. Her instincts screamed a scream to run, but her voice locked inside her throat. She forced herself to step sideways instead, edging toward the front door without turning her back fully on the living room. The old floor betrayed her again with every creak, and she knew they could hear exactly where she was. Then she saw it, on the edge of the coffee table, half hidden under an old magazine. Her phone. She had left it there when she went to bed earlier. It was only a few feet away, but those few feet might as well have been a mile. If she reached for it, she would have to step directly into the open space between the sofa and the cabinet, right into their hands. Laura's eyes flicked between the phone and the door. Her pulse thudded in her ears so loudly she thought it would give her away. She took a shallow breath, and in that instant she realized something chilling. The breathing inside the room had stopped completely. Whoever was hiding, they weren't hiding anymore. They were listening for her next move. Laura's back pressed flat against the hallway wall, her palms damp against the peeling paint as she tried to think. The air inside the house felt heavier now, almost sticky, each second stretching long and slow like a nightmare that wouldn't end. She risked another glance at the window. Mrs. Kent was still outside, her trembling hands pressed to the glass, her lips moving silently. This time, Laura could just make out the words she was forming. "Stay still." Her heart hammered. The umbrella felt useless in her grip. It was a child's toy against a threat she couldn't see. Every creak of the floor, every tick of the clock in the kitchen seemed magnified until it sounded like thunder. She fought the urge to bolt because instinct told her sudden movement would make everything worse. Whoever was in her house wasn't just hiding. They were waiting for her to make the wrong choice. Laura's eyes darted to the coffee table where her phone lay under a curled magazine. The glow from the screen had faded, leaving only the black reflection of the lamp behind her. If she could just reach it, she could call 911. But to do that, she would have to step right into the open, into the stretch of carpet between the sofa and the cabinet, the same space where the muddy footprints had stopped. Her breath caught at the thought. Then she noticed something she hadn't before. The footprints weren't random. They formed a curved pattern, as though whoever made them had circled the room. The last print wasn't behind the sofa at all. It was angled toward her hallway, stopping just a few feet from where she stood now. Her stomach flipped. The smell of damp soil filled her nostrils again, stronger now, mixed with something faintly metallic. She realized with a jolt that the breathing she'd heard before wasn't gone. It had shifted. It was closer. Slow, even. Almost a whisper of air right at the edge of the hallway. Someone was standing just beyond the corner, hidden in the blind spot of her vision. Laura forced her trembling legs to inch sideways, keeping her eyes locked on the dark gap beside the sofa. She tried to control her breathing, matching it to the tick of the unseen clock. The umbrella trembled in her hands. Mrs. Kent raised her palm outside and pressed it flat against the glass, a silent signal Laura couldn't decipher. Was she telling her to run or to wait? Another sound broke the stillness, a faint scrape of fingernails along the hallway wall, no more than a few feet from her. It was deliberate, a warning. Laura's heart leapt to her throat as the realization settled like ice in her chest. Whoever was in her house wasn't just inside her living room anymore. They were already in the hallway between her and the front door. She clutched the umbrella tighter and felt her knees weaken, but she forced herself upright. She couldn't scream, couldn't run blindly. If she was going to survive this, she needed to act smarter than whoever was waiting in the dark. She took a slow step back, barely shifting her weight, and whispered so low only she could hear, "Not this time." The hallway seemed to breathe with her as she tried to steady herself. She could hear Mrs. Kent tapping on the window now, tiny, rapid taps, like a code she didn't understand. In that moment, Laura realized she wasn't just frightened anymore. She was angry. Someone had stepped into her home, into her life, and whatever was about to happen, she wasn't going to let them decide how it ended. Laura pressed her back harder into the wall, the plaster cool against her skin, grounding her for a fleeting second. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that made her ears ache. She could hear the faint rustle of the curtains in the living room, Mrs. Kent's muffled tapping against the glass, and most of all, the slow scrape of fingernails against the hallway paint, dragging just inches from where she stood. Each scratch seemed to slice through her nerves. Her mind spun in frantic circles. She thought about her father, who had always said a house was only as safe as the locks on its doors. Tonight, those locks had failed, or maybe they hadn't mattered at all. Whoever had come inside hadn't forced their way in. They had entered like they belonged, like the house had been waiting for them. That thought chilled her worse than the night air seeping through the cracks. Laura's hand clenched tighter around the umbrella. She tried to summon courage from old memories, the kind that made her feel less fragile. The summer she had stayed up all night in college to finish exams. The winter she had fixed the broken furnace by herself when no one else would come out in the snow. She had survived before. But this was different. This wasn't a problem she could solve with books or tools. This was flesh and bone hiding in the shadows, breathing her air, standing in her hallway. She shifted her weight slowly, sliding one foot backward toward the kitchen. The floor whined beneath her heel, and immediately the breathing stopped again. The silence that followed was even worse than the sound itself. Her throat locked, her stomach tightened, and her eyes stung from not blinking. She knew without seeing that whoever was in the dark was now listening for her heartbeat. Mrs. Kent's silhouette moved outside the window. She lifted both hands, palms pressed against the glass, shaking her head slowly, as if begging Laura not to take another step. Laura's chest burned with the urge to scream for help, but something inside her warned against it. If she screamed, she would confirm her exact position, her fear, her weakness. She swallowed hard and forced her mouth shut. A sudden thump made her flinch. It came from the cabinet in the living room, its door slamming fully shut as if kicked from the inside. At the same instant, the scrape of nails against the wall stopped. Then came another sound, softer, stranger, like a shoe dragging lazily across the floor behind her. Laura spun her head toward the kitchen, and her heart nearly stopped. In the faint light from the living room lamp, she saw it, the outline of a man's boot, half hidden in the shadow of the doorway. The toe pointed directly at her, unmoving like someone frozen mid-step. Laura's breath hitched. She didn't dare move, didn't dare even exhale loudly. Her mind screamed to run, to fight, to do anything, but her body was locked in place. The umbrella trembled in her grip. Every muscle in her body screamed that the moment she made a move, the shadow in the doorway would make one too. And then, like a cruel reminder that she wasn't imagining this, the voice came, low, hoarse, and just above a whisper. "Why don't you turn on the light, Laura?" Her knees buckled and she clutched the wall to steady herself. Whoever was in her house didn't just know her name. They wanted her to know they knew. Laura felt the world tilt under her feet. Hearing her name in that low voice, rasping and calm, was worse than any sound she had imagined in the dark. It wasn't the voice of a stranger calling out randomly. Whoever it was had said her name with the slow familiarity of someone who had practiced it, like a teacher saying it in roll call, like an echo from somewhere she couldn't place. The umbrella's handle slipped slightly in her damp palm. She swallowed hard, tasting metal on her tongue. The shape in the doorway didn't move, but its presence filled the whole hallway. In the dim light, she could see just enough to know it wasn't an accident. A man's outline, tall but thin, standing with one shoulder slightly hunched as if he had been leaning on the wall waiting for her. The boot she had noticed didn't shift. Instead, the man's fingers reached out from the darkness, brushing the frame of the kitchen doorway like a spider, testing its web. He whispered again, quieter this time. "Turn it on, you'll see." Every nerve in Laura's body told her not to, but some grim, frozen part of her wanted to know. The lamp by the living room couch still glowed faintly. Her phone on the table sat black and useless. She thought about Mrs. Kent outside, about the frantic taps on the window that had turned to fists pounding against the glass now. She could see her neighbor's mouth opening in a scream she couldn't hear through the walls. Laura took a shallow breath and, keeping her eyes on the figure, slid one hand slowly along the wall until she felt the cold metal of the hallway light switch. Her thumb hovered over it. The man didn't move, but she could sense him leaning forward, waiting. Behind him, from the living room, came another sound, like a small intake of breath, a softer echo of his. Someone else was still behind the sofa or in the cabinet. Two sets of lungs drawing in air from her house. Her thoughts scattered to the memory of the house keys she'd lost weeks ago. She'd dismissed it at the time, assuming she'd left it at work, but now she saw the truth like a flashbulb going off in her head. Whoever these people were, they hadn't broken in tonight. They'd been coming and going. They'd been inside when she wasn't home. They knew where things were, what time she slept, even her name whispered in the dark. Mrs. Kent's pounding grew harder, and Laura saw her neighbor lift her phone to her ear, probably calling 911. That small sight gave Laura a pinprick of courage. She pressed the switch. The hallway light snapped on with a harsh flicker, bathing everything in cold yellow. Laura's eyes darted instantly to the kitchen doorway, and she saw him clearly for the first time. He was tall, his hair slicked back as if wet, wearing an old dark jacket that looked like it had once been expensive, but was now frayed at the cuffs. His boots were caked with dried mud. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, and locked on hers with a steady, unblinking stare. He smiled a little, but it was a smile without warmth, a careful stretching of his lips, as though he had been waiting for this moment all night. Then she heard the second sound again, a faint creak from the living room. She shifted her eyes just for a heartbeat and caught another figure crouched low behind the sofa. A woman this time, her face hidden under a hood, but Laura could see her fingers, thin and shaking, gripping the edge of the cushion. The man in the doorway noticed her glance, and his smile widened, just a fraction. "Don't worry about her," he murmured. "She's only here for the end." Laura's breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. She gripped the umbrella tighter, the metal ribs bending under the pressure. Her mind scrambled for a plan. The front door was only 6 steps away. Mrs. Kent was outside, maybe the police on the way. But between her and the door stood this man, pale-eyed and still, and somewhere behind the sofa, a woman was crouched like a coiled spring. Laura forced herself not to look away. She steadied her voice as best she could and said, "You need to leave my house." The man tilted his head slightly like a predator curious about its prey. "We already have what we came for," he said softly, "but you walked back in." Behind him, the woman whispered something Laura couldn't catch. The sound of it, low, urgent, and almost pleading, sent another chill down her spine. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something in the man's pale eyes, not anger, but anticipation, like he was waiting for a cue. Laura knew then that she couldn't freeze any longer. If she didn't act soon, whatever had been planned for her inside her own home would happen exactly as they wanted. She tightened her grip on the umbrella and shifted her weight, every muscle in her legs screaming to move. Laura's pulse slammed so hard in her ears that the man's next words nearly blurred into it. He stood there in the yellow light as, though the house belonged to him, his boots planted, one hand still brushing the doorframe like he was staking his claim. The woman behind the sofa had gone completely still, her face hidden in the shadows of her hood, but Laura could feel her presence, like a second heartbeat in the room. The man's pale eyes didn't blink. "It's not your house anymore," he whispered. His voice carried a strange certainty, like he wasn't trying to convince her, but simply stating a fact. "You left it open for us. We've been here longer than you think." The words sent Laura's mind spinning. She thought of the missing key again, of the times she had woken in the night, certain she'd heard footsteps in the hallway, only to dismiss it as old pipes or dreams. She thought of the photo she'd found face down on the carpet just minutes earlier. Had they been standing there, watching her? Even then? Her stomach turned to stone. Mrs. Kent's fists pounded louder on the window now, the thudding frantic. Laura flicked her eyes toward the noise, but the man stepped slightly forward, drawing her attention back. He tilted his head, smiling that thin, chilling smile. "Don't look at her. She can't help you. Nobody can. We've been here waiting. You walked right into us." Laura's grip tightened on the umbrella. Her knuckles burned white, her hand slick with sweat. She remembered Mrs. Kent's warning, "Don't go back inside," and cursed herself silently. But there was no undoing it. She was in the trap now, standing 6 steps from the front door, with 2 strangers between her and safety. The woman behind the sofa shifted suddenly. A scraping sound echoed as her hand dragged against the floorboards. Laura jerked her eyes toward her, and in that instant the hooded figure rose slightly, just enough for the lamplight to catch her face. For one dizzying heartbeat, Laura thought she recognized her. The sharp cheekbones, the deep-set eyes. She was sure she had seen that face before in town, maybe at the grocery store, maybe years earlier at a school meeting. It wasn't the face of a faceless stranger. That familiarity chilled her deeper than anything else. The woman's lips moved, a fast whisper meant only for the man. Laura strained to catch it, but it was just the hiss of words, broken by the thundering of her own heartbeat. The man's smile dropped. He turned his head toward the sofa, his voice colder now. Not yet. Laura seized the moment. She shifted her weight forward, her body screaming at her to run. 6 steps. She pictured them in her mind like rungs of a ladder out of a burning house. But the man must have read it in her eyes because his hand dropped from the doorframe to his jacket pocket. Her breath caught. A metallic glint flashed in the yellow light. Something small but unmistakable. A knife. The umbrella shook in her hand, useless against a blade. She felt her knees tremble, but she locked them, straight, refusing to collapse. Her voice cracked as she forced the words out. "Why are you here?" The man stepped closer, one boot echoing against the wooden floor. He didn't raise the knife. He didn't need to. His voice was calm, even casual, as he said, "Because everything you think is yours isn't." Behind the sofa, the hooded woman straightened fully now, her face half in shadow. Laura saw the outline of something clutched in her hands, too. Papers, folded and stained. The woman spoke at last, her voice raspy but clear. "She doesn't even know, does she?" Laura's chest clenched. The words made no sense, yet they rang with cruel familiarity, as though this night wasn't just about breaking in, it was about revealing something she wasn't supposed to learn. The phone on the coffee table buzzed suddenly, screen flashing with Mrs. Kent's number. The sharp vibration cut through the silence like an alarm. All 3 of them turned their heads toward it at once. For Laura, that split second of distraction was all she had. She had to decide, throw herself at the door and hope to reach it alive, or lunge for the phone and risk being trapped in the center of the room. Her breath shook as she gripped the umbrella tighter, knowing whichever she chose, there would be no turning back. Laura's eyes locked on the phone, its light flashing in rhythmic bursts across the coffee table. That buzzing felt like the only tether left between her and the outside world. Each vibration was Mrs. Kent, her desperate lifeline. The pale-eyed man's gaze followed the glow too, but his expression didn't falter. He simply tilted his head, his lips curving into that same thin smile, as though he was enjoying the tension more than the answer. The woman in the hood clutched the papers tighter. Laura could see now that they weren't just random scraps. They were old, yellowed at the edges, the kind of documents that looked as though they had been pulled from somewhere forgotten. The hooded woman whispered again, but this time the sound was sharper, edged with urgency. She should know now. Laura's heart thudded as she tried to piece it together. What did she need to know? How long had they been inside her walls? She thought back to the weeks she'd dismissed odd things. The cupboard she swore she'd closed, left slightly ajar, the faint odor of damp earth that never went away no matter how much she cleaned. The shoes she once found moved from their place by the door. They weren't accidents. They had been signs she had ignored. The phone buzzed again, and the sound jolted her into action. She took one step toward it, but the man's boots slammed hard against the floor, making the lamp's shade rattle. "Don't," he said softly. Yet the weight in his tone pinned her like a command. He lifted the knife just enough for its edge to catch the light. The umbrella trembled in Laura's hands, and for the first time she realized how absurd it looked, a thin fabric stick against cold steel. Her breath quickened. "Why are you in my house?" she demanded, forcing her voice louder, steadier, though inside she felt like she was coming apart. "What do you want from me?" The man's pale eyes glimmered in the dim light. "This house isn't yours," he repeated, almost gently. "It hasn't been yours for years. You live in it, but it doesn't belong to you." He gestured with the knife toward the hooded woman. "She has what proves it." The woman stepped out from behind the sofa now, her hood sliding back to reveal a face drawn tight with exhaustion. Laura saw it clearly this time. The resemblance, the cheekbones, the eyes. It was faint, buried under years of hard living. But it was there. Laura's heart seized. She had seen this woman before, not at the store, not at a school meeting, but in an old photograph tucked inside one of her mother's albums. The photo was faded, a picture of a teenage girl her mother had once called a mistake we don't speak of, a name she had overheard but never asked about. Her voice cracked. "Evelyn." The name fell out before she could stop it. The hooded woman's eyes flickered with something close to recognition. Her lips parted. "You do remember." Laura staggered back, her knees nearly giving way. Evelyn, the half-sister her mother had hidden, the one whispered about but never spoken of again. And here she was, standing in her living room, clutching papers that looked like deeds, wills, records of ownership. Laura's world tilted. This wasn't a break-in. This was a reckoning. The man's pale eyes never left her. He seemed to drink in Laura's shock like it was the moment he had been waiting for. He lowered the knife slightly, but his tone was still cutting. "She's not alone anymore. You thought you were safe here, Laura, but you've been living in her house all along." The words pressed into Laura's chest, heavier than the fear itself. She couldn't tell if the knife or the truth was sharper. The house she had called home, the rooms filled with her memories, the place where her life had been stitched together, it might all belong to someone else. The phone buzzed once more, but Laura barely heard it now. Her eyes flicked between the man's blade, the papers in Evelyn's hands, and the front door that felt both too close and impossibly far. Her neighbor was still outside, pounding, desperate. And inside, everything she thought she knew about her life was unraveling into shadows and whispers that threatened to swallow her whole. Laura's hands shook harder, but her voice cut the silence anyway. "Then tell me what you want from me." The man's smile deepened, and Evelyn's grip on the papers tightened. In that breathless second, Laura realized the answer wasn't just going to be about the house. It was going to be about her, family, her past, and a truth she wasn't ready to face. Laura's breath came shallow, almost ragged, as the weight of Evelyn's name echoed in her mind. For so many years, she'd convinced herself that Story was nothing more than a rumor. Her mother's whispered shame, dismissed at family gatherings, silenced with a sharp look if anyone dared to bring it up. But here Evelyn stood, no longer a half-forgotten name from the past, but flesh and bone inside her living room, clutching proof that threatened to tear Laura's world apart. The papers in Evelyn's hand trembled slightly, though her eyes remained fixed on Laura. There was anger in them, yes, but also something else. Hurt, maybe, or a hunger that had gone unanswered for years. The pale-eyed man stayed close by her side, his presence like a shadow stitched to her, steadying her when her fingers shook. Laura couldn't decide if he was a protector or a puppet master, but either way, he had made himself part of her story too. "You've lived here your whole life," Evelyn said finally, her voice raw and uneven, as if it hadn't been used for years. "Safe, comfortable, thinking you earned it. But it wasn't yours, Laura. Not all of it. Not the way you believe." She lifted the papers higher, shaking them slightly as though daring Laura to come take them. "Mother gave me nothing, not even her name. And while you had the photographs on the mantle, the holidays, the dinners around this table, do you know where I was?" Her tone cracked. "I was watching from outside." Laura's throat closed. She thought of her childhood, the Christmas mornings, unwrapping presents under the same roof, her mother's hand brushing her hair before school, the smell of fresh bread in the oven. Memories she thought belonged only to her family. She had never questioned why her mother grew so distant at times, or why there were long nights of hushed phone calls. Now those cracks had names, faces, and shadows that had slipped quietly into her home. The pale-eyed man spoke again, his knife gleaming in the lamplight as he rested it against the edge of the cabinet. "This isn't about breaking in. We've been here longer than you realize. We've walked these halls while you slept. We've listened." His voice softened, but it chilled her more. "We know your secrets, Laura, and now you know ours." Mrs. Kent's pounding against the window grew frantic. Laura could hear her muffled shouts, though the words blurred into the thudding of blood in her ears. For a split second, she thought of rushing the door, but Evelyn's gaze stopped her cold. Those eyes, so much like her mother's, and at the same time nothing like them, held her in place. "What do you want from me?" Laura forced the words out again, louder this time, sharp enough to cut the stillness. "If you came for the house, take it. If you came for me, then say it, but stop creeping in the shadows like cowards." Evelyn's lips pressed together tightly, as if the words stung her. She stepped forward from the sofa's shadow, her boots leaving faint smears of mud on the carpet. Her voice lowered, almost breaking. "I came for what I should have had, for what she denied me, for proof that I wasn't just the mistake she threw away." She lifted the papers higher, unfolding them now to reveal faded ink, legal documents, signatures that looked eerily like their mother's handwriting. "This deed, this house, it was signed to me, before you were even old enough to write your own name." Laura's knees buckled and she grabbed the wall to steady herself. It couldn't be true. Her mother had loved her, had built this life for her. The idea that her entire home, every wall she painted, every corner filled with memories, was never really hers, carved through her like glass. She shook her head, but Evelyn stepped closer, relentless. "You think you're the only daughter she had?" Evelyn whispered, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to shed. "You think you're the only one she gave her love to? She gave me nothing, Laura. And when she died, she left me only one thing, the right to take back what was stolen." The pale-eyed man's knife tapped gently against the wood of the cabinet, a dull rhythm that echoed like a clock counting down. "Time's short," he muttered. His voice was calm, but his eyes darted toward the window where Mrs. Kent's phone still glowed. "She's called for help. You won't have long before they're here." Laura's chest heaved. She wanted to scream, to deny it all, to throw Evelyn and her pale-eyed shadow out of her home. But the papers in Evelyn's hand were real, and the truth buried in her mother's silence was spilling out now in the most brutal way possible. She swallowed hard and lifted the umbrella again, her voice shaking but firm. "If this house was yours, why wait until now? Why sneak in at night? Why hide like ghosts instead of knocking on the door?" Evelyn's face twisted, torn between rage and grief. She leaned forward so close that Laura could see the faint scar running down the side of her cheek. Her words spilled out like poison, each one cutting deeper. "Because she told me never to come back. She told me if I ever showed my face to you, she'd erase me completely. And she did, until tonight. Now it's your turn to see what it feels like to lose everything." Laura's grip tightened on the umbrella. The fear inside her shifted into something harder, sharper. She had been ambushed in her own home, her past thrown in her face. But one thing Evelyn hadn't counted on was Laura's refusal to break. Her neighbor's voice finally cut through, loud enough to hear through the glass. "Police are coming." The pale-eyed man's expression sharpened. Evelyn's breath hitched, and Laura realized with a sudden clarity that the standoff would not last much longer. Whatever happened next would decide not only who the house belonged to, but who walked out of it alive. The wail of sirens faintly touched the night air in the distance, thin but unmistakable, creeping closer with every second. Laura's head turned toward the window instinctively, though she didn't dare move her feet. Mrs. Kent stood outside, her silhouette frantic under the streetlight, shouting words Laura couldn't hear, but could read plainly on her lips. "Hold on!" Evelyn's hand trembled around the bundle of papers. The pale-eyed man shifted uneasily for the first time, his knife tapping faster against the cabinet. He glanced toward the window, his jaw tightening. The sound of help approaching didn't frighten him. It annoyed him, like a hunter realizing his prey had managed to buy itself a few more minutes. Laura, her chest rising and falling in shallow bursts, tightened her grip on the umbrella. For all its weakness compared to the glinting steel in his hand, it was something she could hold, something that kept her from collapsing under the weight of fear. She steadied herself against the wall, forcing her knees not to buckle. Her voice, though shaky, cut the thick silence. "Evelyn, if this house is yours, then why didn't you come in the daylight? Why creep through shadows? Why hide behind him with a knife?" Evelyn flinched, her lips parting as though the question pierced something inside her. Her eyes darted to the pale-eyed man, then back to Laura. The tension in her shoulders gave her away. Evelyn was not fully in control. She was clinging to him as much as she was to the old papers in her hands. "Because I didn't think you'd listen," Evelyn whispered, her voice breaking. "Because every time I tried before, I was sent away, told to forget, told to leave. Do you know what it feels like to be the secret your mother buried? To watch from the street while you ate dinners at her table?" Laura's breath caught. The words struck deep, because in her heart she knew she had never wondered who her mother had pushed aside to keep their family intact. She had lived a life protected by silence, never daring to ask why there were cracks in her mother's stories. Now those cracks had split open, flooding her house with shadows. The sirens drew closer. The pale-eyed man's patience thinned. He took a step toward Laura, knife glinting under the yellow lamp. "We don't have time for your pity," he said, his voice cutting, eyes sharp. "She came here for what is hers, and you're going to give it to her." Laura swallowed hard, her throat aching as she forced her words out. "If she wants the house, take the papers to court. Take them to a lawyer. Not like this, not with knives and shadows." He laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "Do you think anyone listens to Evelyn? Do you think anyone would believe her after years of being erased? We came here tonight because this was the only way left." He raised the knife slightly, the light flashing across its edge. "And because fear makes people listen faster than words ever could." Evelyn's hand shook harder now. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no sound came. For a moment, she looked less like an intruder and more like the young girl Laura vaguely remembered from a faded photograph, a ghost of someone who had been denied a place at the table. Laura seized that moment. "Evelyn," she said softly, firmly, "if you're my sister, then I'm listening. Right now. You don't need him to speak for you. You don't need his knife." The man snapped his head toward her, his pale eyes narrowing. "Don't turn her against me." His voice was sharp now, no longer calm, the thin thread of control snapping under the strain. He turned his body fully toward Laura, the knife raised. Laura's pulse thundered, her knuckles whitened around the umbrella. The air between them felt electric, charged with the collision of fear and defiance. Mrs. Kent's fists pounded harder on the glass, her shouts more urgent now as red and blue lights flickered faintly down the street. Evelyn suddenly cried out, her voice high and ragged. "Stop it! This isn't what I wanted!" She dropped the papers to the floor, the old documents scattering across the carpet like dead leaves. Her hands covered her face, shoulders shaking with sobs. The pale-eyed man froze, his grip tightening on the knife, confusion flickering across his expression. Laura's eyes darted to the papers, then back to Evelyn. "Then what did you want?" she demanded, her voice firm despite the tremor in it. Through her tears, Evelyn looked up, her voice raw. "I just wanted to be seen. I just wanted to be part of something. I wanted to stand in this house without being told I didn't belong." She turned toward the man beside her, her voice breaking into anger. "I didn't want blood!" The man's pale eyes darkened, his jaw clenching. He turned on her sharply, his knife lowering, but his hand gripping her shoulder hard. "Don't you dare back out now! We've come too far!" Evelyn wrenched free, stumbling back against the sofa, the papers scattered beneath her feet. "You used me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You wanted this house for yourself." Laura's chest heaved as the truth broke open like a dam. The man had never cared about Evelyn's past, about her longing to belong. He had seen her pain, her desperation, and twisted it into something darker. He wasn't there to help her reclaim a home. He was there to steal it all. The sirens grew louder, the flashing lights bleeding through the curtains. The pale-eyed man's composure cracked. His gaze darted to the window, then back to Laura. For the first time, his smile faltered. "You'll regret this," he hissed, his voice venomous. He took one step back toward the kitchen, his knife still raised, eyes shifting between Laura and Evelyn. Laura knew the moment was slipping. She could feel the choice rising inside her like a tide. Fight, run, or freeze. She thought of her mother, of all the silences that had shaped her life. She thought of Evelyn, broken and sobbing, clutching the air as if it might anchor her. And she thought of Mrs. Kent still pounding on the glass, refusing to leave her side. Her body moved before her mind could second guess. With a cry she didn't know was inside her, Laura swung the umbrella with every ounce of strength she had. The metal ribs cracked against the man's wrist, the knife clattering to the floor with a sharp clang. He snarled, lunging toward her, but Laura kicked the knife across the carpet, sending it skidding beneath the cabinet. Evelyn screamed, stumbling back, her sobs twisting into gasps. The man grabbed Laura's arm, his grip iron, dragging her toward him. She fought wildly, thrashing, slamming the umbrella against his side, his shoulder, anything she could reach. His breath was hot against her ear as he growled, "You don't deserve any of it." The front door burst open. Red and blue lights flooded the living room as two officers rushed in, shouting commands. The pale-eyed man froze, his grip loosening just enough for Laura to rip herself free. The officers tackled him to the ground in a storm of shouts and movement, his curses cut short as his face was pressed to the carpet. Laura staggered back, gasping, her umbrella clattering from her hands. Evelyn collapsed to her knees among the scattered papers, her sobs breaking through the chaos. Mrs. Kent rushed through the doorway, her arms grabbing Laura in a tight embrace, whispering frantically, "You're safe now, you're safe." But Laura's eyes weren't on the man being dragged away in handcuffs, nor on the flashing lights spilling into her home. They were on Evelyn, trembling on the floor, clutching the old deeds in her hands like they were both a weapon and a wound. In that moment, Laura understood. The nightmare wasn't just the pale-eyed man with the knife. It was the silence her mother had left behind, the hidden truths that had brought Evelyn back into her life in the most terrifying way possible. And no siren, no officer, no locked door would erase the fact that her family was not what she had believed it to be. Laura knelt slowly, her voice low but steady as she looked at Evelyn through the blur of tears and flashing lights. "You don't have to hide anymore," she whispered. "Not in the dark, not in my house." Evelyn looked up, her eyes raw and red, her lips trembling with disbelief. And for the first time that night, the fear in the room gave way to something else, something older, heavier, and far harder to face. The truth of a family broken long before the knocking on the window began. The house was flooded with flashing red and blue, the kind of harsh light that stripped everything of warmth. Laura sat slumped against the wall, her chest still heaving, her fingers trembling as if the umbrella's weight still lingered in them. The pale-eyed man had been dragged out in a storm of uniformed bodies, his curses trailing down the hallway until the slam of the front door silenced him. She expected relief to rush in once he was gone, but it didn't. Instead, there was only a deeper kind of heaviness, the kind that came when the threat left but the wound stayed wide open. Evelyn remained on the floor in the center of the living room, her knees pressed into the carpet, her hands clutching the yellowed papers like they were the only things keeping her from disappearing completely. Her sobs had quieted to broken breaths, the sound of someone emptied out, hollowed by years of silence and a single night of chaos. The police officers circled, one kneeling near her, asking questions in a firm but not unkind voice. Evelyn didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the faded ink of those deeds, her lips moving soundlessly, whispering words to herself that Laura couldn't hear. Mrs. Kent sat beside Laura now, one arm wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her sweater smelled faintly of lavender, something comforting and old, but Laura's body remained rigid, every muscle coiled. Mrs. Kent whispered, "It's over now, sweetheart. He's gone. You're safe." But Laura's eyes stayed on Evelyn. Safe. The word felt empty. How could she be safe when the real danger hadn't just been a knife or a man with pale eyes? It had been her own blood, a sister no one had spoken of, returning like a ghost carrying the proof of her existence. The papers Evelyn clutched weren't weapons, but they cut deeper than steel ever could. One of the officers approached Laura, kneeling to her level. His voice was calm, professional. "Ma'am, do you need medical attention? Do you want us to get the paramedics in here to check you out?" Laura shook her head quickly. Her throat burned, her voice scraping out. "No, I'm fine." Fine was a lie, but it was the only word she had. The officer nodded but didn't leave. He glanced toward Evelyn, then back to Laura. "We'll need to take statements, both of you. It looks like this wasn't a random break-in." Laura let out a bitter laugh, too sharp to be humor. "No, it wasn't random at all." The officer studied her for a moment before rising and walking toward his partner. Laura stayed where she was, the wall behind her the only thing holding her upright. She felt Mrs. Kent's hand squeeze her shoulder, but her mind was miles away, back in her mother's house, hearing the whispered name Evelyn for the first time, then being told never to repeat it. Back in the years of family dinners where empty chairs had been pushed aside, where secrets had been buried under polished silverware and forced smiles, Evelyn finally looked up, her eyes raw and red, locked onto Laura's. She raised the bundle of papers, shaking them in the air. "You don't understand," she said, her voice cracking into something between fury and grief. "All those years I begged for a place. She gave it to you. She left me outside like an animal, and when she died, she left me this house on paper. But what's a paper worth when no one cares who it belongs to?" Her voice grew louder, cutting through the officer's quiet murmurs. "You lived here. You wore her love like a crown. I had nothing but scraps." Laura's lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to argue, to say she hadn't asked for any of this, that she hadn't known. But her tongue sat heavy in her mouth, because deep down, some part of her did know, knew that her mother's silences had been deliberate, that the cracks in her stories were too deep to be simple forgetfulness. She finally managed to whisper, "Why didn't you ever come to me? Not like this. Not in the dark." Evelyn's eyes burned. "Do you think I didn't try? Do you think I didn't stand on this street and knock? But when I did, I was told to leave, told to forget, told that I was nothing, and you looked out of these windows and you never saw me." Her voice broke. "You never wanted to." Laura's chest tightened, her heart twisting painfully. Memories surfaced unbidden. A shadow she once noticed at the edge of the yard when she was younger, dismissed as imagination. A girl standing outside the bakery where her mother used to shop, who looked too much like her to be coincidence. Had that been Evelyn? Watching, waiting while Laura turned her face away? The officers exchanged looks, one murmuring into his radio. They were speaking in codes, but Laura caught enough to understand. The pale-eyed man had a record, a trail of manipulation and violence. He had been using Evelyn, twisting her longing for family into a tool for his own gain. Laura's stomach churned. He had brought the knife, the threats, the shadows. But Evelyn had brought her truth. Laura forced herself to stand, her legs shaky but holding. She took a slow step toward Evelyn, her eyes never leaving her sister's. The papers crinkled in Evelyn's grip, her knuckles white as if letting them go meant losing herself all over again. "You wanted to be seen," Laura said softly, her voice rough but steady. "I see you now." Evelyn's jaw clenched. Her tears spilled freely, dripping onto the deeds in her hands. "Too late," she whispered. "It's too late. You can't erase what she did." Laura swallowed hard. "I can't erase it, but I can tell you this. You don't have to stand outside anymore. Not if you don't want to." For a long moment, Evelyn just stared at her, her breath shuddering, her body torn between collapse and defiance. The room felt suspended, the sirens still flashing outside, the officers waiting, Mrs. Kent clutching Laura's arm. The past and the present collided in that one breathless pause. Then Evelyn crumpled, dropping the papers onto the carpet. They scattered around her knees, the faded ink smearing slightly under her tears. She buried her face in her hands, her sobs raw, echoing through the house. Laura knelt slowly beside her, hesitating before placing a trembling hand on Evelyn's shoulder. Evelyn didn't pull away. She shook beneath Laura's touch, but she didn't move. The officers shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other. Mrs. Kent wiped her own tears, whispering prayers under her breath. Outside, neighbors had gathered, drawn by the flashing lights and chaos. They whispered among themselves, pointing at the house, speculating about the scandal of the night. Laura could already hear it spreading like wildfire through the street, about the pale-eyed intruder, about the long-lost sister, about the house that wasn't what it seemed. But inside, in the middle of the mess, Laura finally understood something her mother had never taught her. Silence only breeds ghosts. And those ghosts always come back, whether at the window, in the hallway, or in the blood of the sister you were never allowed to claim. Evelyn's sobs slowed, her shoulders sagging. She whispered into her hands, so faint Laura almost didn't catch it. "I didn't want to hurt you." Laura's throat tightened. She squeezed Evelyn's shoulder, her own tears finally spilling. "I know," she whispered back. "I know." The night that had begun with a knock on the window ended not with fire or blood, but with two sisters sitting on the floor of a house full of broken history, holding pieces of each other they never thought they'd have. The pale-eyed man would be booked, the neighbors would gossip, and the police would file their reports. But the story was not about him, not really. It was about a house that had been a cage of secrets, about two women who had lived in the same shadow all their lives, and about the door that had finally cracked open between them. Laura glanced at the scattered papers, the deeds and wills that claimed the house belonged to Evelyn. For the first time, she didn't see them as proof of loss. She saw them as proof that Evelyn had always existed, even when no one wanted to admit it. And perhaps, just perhaps, they could both learn to live here, not as strangers in the night, but as sisters who had finally seen each other in the light. By the time the officers finished their sweep of the house, the sky outside had begun to pale with the first suggestion of dawn. The flashing lights that had turned the street into a carnival of fear faded, one car after another pulling away, leaving only silence in their wake. Neighbors lingered in their doorways, robes pulled tight against the chill, whispering across lawns. Some shook their heads, others clutched coffee mugs as though the heat could chase away the unease. Their voices drifted into Laura's home in fractured bits. Break-in, sister, papers. A story already morphing, reshaping into something the town would carry like gossip passed through generations. Inside, the house felt like a stranger. The familiar furniture looked rearranged even though it wasn't. The walls felt tighter, and the air carried the sour scent of damp earth and adrenaline. Laura sat at the kitchen table, a blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Mrs. Kent hovered nearby, setting down a steaming mug of tea that Laura's hands were too unsteady to hold. Her neighbor's eyes were swollen from tears and worry, but her voice was soft, protective. "Drink. Just a sip. You've been through enough tonight." Evelyn sat across from her, her hair damp with sweat, her face streaked with tears. The papers lay between them, spread like a battlefield of faded ink and brittle edges. She had stopped sobbing hours earlier, but her silence weighed heavier than any scream could. Her eyes were hollow, but behind them flickered something raw. Anger and grief tangled together. The pale-eyed man was gone, locked away, but the damage he left between them sat squarely on the table, in ink, older than either of them wanted to admit. Laura finally forced herself to wrap her fingers around the mug, though she didn't drink. Her voice was low, hoarse, from the night. "You could have come to me. You could have knocked in the day, not the middle of the night." Evelyn's head lifted slowly. Her voice was thin, shaking. "I tried, Laura. You don't remember, but I tried. I came to the bakery once, our mother's bakery. You were behind the counter. I thought if I stood there long enough, if I bought something, maybe you'd look at me and see her in my face. But you rang me up without a word and went back to serving the others. You didn't even see me." Laura's stomach twisted. Memory flickered. Years ago, a customer whose face had unsettled her for reasons she couldn't explain. She had turned away quickly, chalking the feeling up to a bad day. She had never thought twice about it since. Until now. "You looked right through me," Evelyn whispered, her hands tightening around the edges of the papers. "Everyone always did." Mrs. Kent's eyes filled again, her hand trembling as she reached for Laura's shoulder. "You couldn't have known, dear. How could you?" But Laura's guilt was a sharp weight pressing down. She had lived in a house filled with warmth, with dinners and birthdays, while another girl, her sister, stood outside, watching through the windows. She had convinced herself her life was normal, that the silences were nothing more than quirks of her mother's grief. Now she saw those silences for what they really were, walls built to keep Evelyn out. Laura leaned forward, her blanket slipping down her shoulders. Her voice was stronger, now though her chest still ached. "I see you now, Evelyn. I see what she tried to erase, and I can't change what she did or what I didn't see. But if you came here for this house—" She tapped the pile of papers. "Then take it. If it proves you were written into this place, then it's yours." Evelyn's eyes widened, her lips parting. For the first time that night, shock replaced grief. "You just hand it over?" Laura swallowed hard. "It was never really about the house, was it? It was about her, about what she gave me and denied you. You want the walls, the roof, the proof you belonged. I understand that now. And if keeping these papers is what it takes for you to feel like you're not invisible anymore, then take them. I don't want them to be a weapon between us." Evelyn's breath shuddered. She clutched the papers tighter, then loosened her grip as though they burned her. Her voice cracked. "You think this fixes anything? You think signing over wood and bricks erases the years I spent outside in the cold, wondering why she hated me?" "No," Laura said quietly. "It doesn't fix it. Nothing can. But it can be a start." For a long moment, Evelyn just stared at her, tears welling but not falling. The air between them was thick, as if the whole house held its breath, waiting for her answer. Mrs. Kent, unable to stay silent, murmured gently, "Girls, you both lost her. Don't let her mistakes make you lose each other, too." The words hung heavy, like smoke that refused to clear. Evelyn finally lowered the papers onto the table. She pushed them across the wood toward Laura, her hands trembling. "I didn't come here for signatures. I didn't come here for lawyers or deeds. I came because I wanted you to feel what I felt, afraid, uncertain, unwanted. I wanted you to know what it was like to have everything pulled out from under you." Laura's throat tightened. "And now?" she whispered. Evelyn's eyes shimmered with something unreadable. "Now I don't know what I want. Her voice faltered at the mention of the pale-eyed man. "He made me believe fear was the only way you'd ever listen. But maybe I just wanted you to look at me. And now you finally are." Silence filled the kitchen, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. The house, scarred by the night's terror, seemed to lean in on their conversation, the weight of years pressing down on both of them. Laura reached across the table, her fingers brushing the edge of the papers, but not to take them, just to push them gently aside. She looked directly into Evelyn's eyes, then stay, not as an intruder, not as a stranger. Stay as my sister. If you want to be seen, then let me see you every day, not just in the shadows. Evelyn's breath hitched, her chest rising sharply. The offer hung in the air like a fragile thread, one tug away from breaking. She glanced. At the window, at the neighbors whispering outside, at the world that had already begun to twist her story into something monstrous. Then she looked back at Laura, her expression torn between disbelief and yearning. "I don't know if I can," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I've lived too long in the dark. I don't know how to live in the light anymore." Laura's eyes filled with tears she no longer tried to hold back. "Then we'll learn together." For the first time, Evelyn let out a sound that wasn't a sob or a whisper. It was a trembling laugh, bitter but real. She shook her head, wiping her face with the back of her sleeve. "You make it sound so easy." Laura managed a faint, weary smile. Nothing about tonight was easy, but staying hidden, staying enemies. That's harder. I can't do that anymore, and neither can you. The words seemed to settle into Evelyn's bones. She lowered her gaze to the table, to the papers that had once felt like weapons, but now looked like fragile pieces of a story too long buried. Her fingers loosened completely, leaving them untouched between them. The two sisters sat in silence as dawn broke fully, painting the kitchen in pale gold. The house creaked softly, no longer with the menace of intruders, but with the weight of its own history. For the first time since the knock at the window, Laura felt something she hadn't thought possible. Hope. Fragile, uncertain, but alive. The night had taken her safety, her illusions, her trust in the walls around her. But it had given her back a sister she had never allowed herself to see. And as the light filled the room, she knew the hardest part was yet to come, not surviving the night, but facing the day that followed. The first light of morning spilled fully through the torn curtains, laying a soft golden hue across the wreckage of the night. The living room bore its scars, papers scattered on the floor, the lamp tilted at an odd angle, muddy footprints streaking the once neat carpet. The air was heavy with the scent of damp soil, sweat, and the faint metallic tang of fear. Yet, as Laura sat at the kitchen table with Evelyn beside her, there was a strange quiet, not peace exactly, but the silence that follows a storm, when the winds retreat and only the broken branches remain. Mrs. Kent had gone back across the street, though she lingered at the window before leaving, promising she would return with warm food once Laura had rested. The officers had finished their questions, taking the pale-eyed man away in handcuffs, his curses fading into the night like a bad dream. But Evelyn remained, not as an intruder now, not as a shadow slipping through cracks, but as something heavier, more complicated, a sister who carried the weight of years Laura could never give back. For a long while they didn't speak. Evelyn traced the edges of the old papers with her finger, her face pale in the dawn light. Laura watched her, heart heavy, her mind circling around the same truth. The walls of this house had never been just hers. They had carried Evelyn's absence as much as Laura's presence. And now, with all the secrets ripped open, the question lingered. What would happen next? Finally, Laura broke the silence. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "Last night, when I heard that knock, I thought it was the start of a nightmare. And maybe it was. But now, I don't think it was just that. I think it was the start of something else." Evelyn's head turned slowly, her eyes raw and red from hours of tears. The start of what? Laura took a shaky breath. The start of us finally facing what she left behind, All the lies, the silences, the years we lost. We can't pretend anymore. We can't keep living like strangers. Evelyn's lips trembled. Do you really believe we can fix it? After everything? Laura let out a long sigh, her gaze falling to the papers between them. Fix it? No, some things can't be fixed, but maybe they can be faced. Maybe we can stop hiding and start living with the truth, even if it hurts. Evelyn's shoulders slumped, and for a moment she looked smaller, younger, like the child Laura imagined standing outside their mother's door, waiting for someone to let her in. She whispered, almost to herself, "All I ever wanted was to be let in." Laura reached across the table, her hand trembling, and placed it over Evelyn's. Evelyn flinched at first, her instinct to pull away sharp and quick, but then she stilled. Her hand remained beneath Laura's, fragile but real. "You're in now," Laura said softly. "Not as a stranger, not as a shadow, as my sister. That's what you've always been, whether we admitted it or not." Tears slid silently down Evelyn's cheeks, but she didn't look away. For the first time, Laura saw not just anger or grief, but the faint flicker of something else, hope, fragile as a candle flame. The morning stretched on, and with it came the knowledge that nothing about their lives would ever be the same. The neighbors would talk. The police would file their reports. The man with the pale eyes would face his consequences. But the deeper story, the one written in silence and denial, was theirs to decide. Laura leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. She thought about her mother, about the heavy quiet she had carried all her life, about the way she had built walls with words unsaid. Laura realized now that she had inherited that same silence, that she had learned to look away instead of look closer, and last night's terror had been the price of all that looking away. When she opened her eyes again, Evelyn was staring at her. For the first time, her sister's gaze wasn't demanding or accusing. It was searching, waiting. Laura gave a small, weary smile. "We can't change her choices, but we can choose different ones now, starting today." Evelyn let out a shaky laugh, half bitter, half disbelieving. "You make it sound so simple." Laura shook her head. "It's not simple. It's the hardest thing I've ever said, but it's true." The sisters sat in the golden morning light, two women bound by blood and secrets, by pain and possibility. The house around them no longer felt like a safe haven, but it no longer felt like a prison either. It was something else entirely, a place where truth had finally been spoken. Laura thought of the night's beginning, the knock on the window, Mrs. Kent's frantic warning, the whisper that someone was already in the room. It had been true in more ways than one. The intruder had not only been a man with pale eyes and a knife, but the past itself, the secrets and shadows that had always lived inside these walls. And now, at last, those intruders had faces, names, voices. They were no longer hidden. She turned back to Evelyn, her voice soft but resolute. "This house doesn't belong to one of us. It belongs to both, because it carries both our stories now. If you want to leave, I won't stop you. But if you want to stay, then stay as my sister." Evelyn's tears glistened in the dawn light. She didn't answer right away, but her hand remained beneath Laura's. That was enough. The day had begun, and with it a fragile new chapter. The knock on the window had opened more than just fear. It had opened the door to the truth. And the truth, however painful, was the only thing strong enough to carry them forward. Sometimes the real danger isn't the stranger hiding in the dark. It's the secrets we bury in our own homes, the silences we inherit, the truths we refuse to face. But no matter how deep those secrets lie, they always find a way to return. And when they do, they demand to be seen. For Laura and Evelyn, the night that began with fear ended with a fragile chance at forgiveness, a chance to stop hiding, to stop pretending, and to begin again, not as strangers divided by silence, but as sisters bound by truth. And maybe that's the lesson we can all take. Walls can keep out the wind and rain, but they can't keep out the past. Only honesty, however painful, can do that. Before we end this story, tell me in the comments below, have you ever had a secret in your family that no one wanted to talk about? How did it change you when the truth finally came out? Share your thoughts. I read every one of them. And if you found this story powerful, don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Auntie Lia and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next story. Your support means more than you know.